إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما ثم أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. We always begin every Friday, every Jumu'ah when we come together by praising Allah and thanking Him, thanking Allah for the opportunity to come here in the middle of our busy weeks, in the middle of our hectic schedules, that He's given us the opportunity to come here and to sit and to remember Allah and to learn about what the Prophet ﷺ has taught us for this short time that we have every week. And in our time together today, I wanted to share this beautiful gem of a narration from the Prophet ﷺ, just to give you an idea of the significance of this narration. So, we know of Imam al-Bukhari, he's one of the top scholars of hadith in our entire tradition, right? So one of his peers, his name was Imam Abu Dawood, and he's the author of a very famous collection of hadith that's also studied very often in madrasas and things like that. So this author, mashallah, he's had memorized hundreds of thousands of hadith, and he says in a quote attributed to him that when I looked at overall all of the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, hundreds of thousands, I saw that they could be summarized in about 4,000 narrations. And he says, when you look at those 4,000, you can kind of summarize the main ideas of those 4,000 in 4 narrations. And one of those narrations we're going to be talking about today. So this narration comes to us from Abu Hurairah, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. He tells us that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Min husni Islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'nih." So roughly translating to the fact that part of the perfection of a person's Islam, of their external good deeds, is leaving things that don't concern them, right? And the reason why scholars say this is such a profound narration is that at the end of the day, our Islam, our faith, is telling us to do some things and to not do other things, right? So this narration is capturing what are the things that we should stay away from and what are the things that we should avoid. So in this short time together, we're going to dig into this narration a little bit more to understand what the Prophet ﷺ is telling us here. So in the beginning, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Min husni Islam," right? So the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that it's part of the beauty of the Islam of a person, right? So the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us a very profound lesson here, right? And that is that, being Muslim or, accepting Islam or just acknowledging that we worship Allah and that we follow the Prophet ﷺ, it's a beautiful thing, it's a massive accomplishment, it's one of the biggest blessings that Allah can give any person, but that's the beginning of a journey, right? None of us here would say that, we are equal to someone like Umar ibn Khattab, one of the greatest companions. None of us would say that we're equal to that person because we're both Muslim, right? We understand that being Muslim is a beautiful thing, but it's like a baseline, and that our faith, there's room for it to be more beautiful and there's room for it to be better, right? So just doing what Allah asks us to do and avoiding what He asks us to avoid is the beginning level of our journey to build a relationship with Allah, right? But there's so much more to it, right? The Prophet ﷺ is telling us here that, when it comes to our manners, when it comes to the way that we deal with other people, the things that we focus our life and our energy on, that's where you really see the beauty of a person's Islam, right? If we're eating some food, and obviously some food might be made very well, it might taste delicious, right? But if it's just dumped on a plate and just like, shoved in front of us, right? Maybe it'll still taste good, but it's not the same as when someone like plates it really nicely and it's covered in some garnish and it's in like a nice pattern. That makes the same food look more beautiful. And so the Prophet ﷺ is telling us here that having good character and focusing on what we choose to avoid is a way for us to beautify our faith. Right? So he's telling us that it's from the beauty of our Islam to not engage in things that don't concern me. So the first beautiful lesson the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us here is that our faith and our Islam has levels, right? And that one of the ways to beautify our faith and our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to avoid digging into things that don't concern us. So this is the first lesson here, that the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us that we have different levels, and we, as believers, we should strive to not be okay with the bare minimum, right? We should be trying to push ourselves to beautify our Islam even more. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that there are different levels and there's ways we can improve. So then the Prophet ﷺ tells us that what is this thing that will beautify our Islam, what will beautify our faith? He says, "Tarku ma la ya'ni," right? So this first word, tark, right, is to leave something, right? And so this is another profound lesson. The scholars tell us that, if you're like, the only way to leave something is to know that you're doing it, right? Like if I'm asleep and someone later on, like if someone tells me that I snore, right? There's no way for me to know that while I'm asleep. The only way I can know that is if someone tells me, right? Similarly, if we're holding something and someone tells us to leave it, let's say if my hand is numb and I don't even know I'm holding a pencil or something, and someone tells me to drop it, I'm not going to know what to do, right? So we have to be aware of what we're doing in order to leave certain things. This is a very profound lesson that the Prophet ﷺ is teaching us. That, if I don't think that I'm doing something, right, there's no way I'm going to think about leaving it or abandoning it, right? Whether that's maybe I'm not even aware that I talk about other people or that I backbite about other people, right? If I don't even recognize that I do that, and someone, I hear a reminder at the masjid that we should stop backbiting, if I don't even know that I backbite, then I'm not even going to pay attention to that advice, right? So the Prophet ﷺ is giving us a very important piece of advice here, that we have to be aware of the things that we're doing. And the scholars of spirituality talk about being aware of what we're doing with our eyes, with our hands, with our tongue, with our limbs, like every part of our body, that we should be aware of whether those parts of our body are leading us to something that doesn't please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's even another layer here, right, where maybe I don't do something, but my heart is really attached to it, right? Like maybe I don't talk bad about other people, but I feel like I'm always tempted to, or I feel like my heart is always craving to share something in a gathering that makes everybody think I have the most interesting news or information about everybody, right? So the Prophet ﷺ here is telling us it's not enough to just not do something with our hands or with our eyes, right? It's also important that our heart shouldn't be attached to that thing, that we need to disengage with our hearts. Because if we're avoiding something on the outside, but our hearts are really eager to get involved in it or really miss the feeling of doing it, then that's a sign that we need to work on ourselves. And finally, this last part of the hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ says that the beautification of our Islam, part of it is in leaving ma la ya'nihi, right? So this phrase here means things that don't concern us. But this is a really important phrase, right? Because first of all, the first question is, who gets to define what concerns me and what doesn't, right? If it was up to each of us, maybe I could think that, of course we would never say this, but someone might say that, things that are happening to Muslims on the other side of the world, that doesn't concern me, right? It doesn't have to do with me, it doesn't have to do with my everyday life, so I don't need to get involved, right? Or if, maybe in front of me, a sibling or a friend is speaking in a really terrible way to someone else, I feel like, that doesn't concern me, so I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to speak up, right? If it was up to us, then maybe that's how we would define, maybe we would read this hadith and think that way, right? But the scholars tell us that, no, what it means, this idea of what doesn't concern me, that's not up to me and you to define, right? That's something that the scholars, there's a broader definition of our faith that exists for what concerns me and what doesn't concern me. And what the scholars say in the commentary on this hadith is that ultimately, What doesn't concern me is something that has no benefit for my life in this world or my life in the hereafter, right? So the scholars are saying that, look, like whatever needs we have in this world, maybe it's, whether it's pursuing an income, whether it's taking care of our families, those kinds of things that exist in the world, or things that are going to make us better in the hereafter, like, improving our practice of our Islam, improving our character, things like that. That's the scope of what concerns me, right? And that does include things like standing up for injustice when we see it in front of us and resisting things that we know are wrong. Those are things that do concern us. But the scholars tell us that, this definition of what doesn't concern me means that things like amassing more and more wealth in this world purely for the sake of luxury, right, without any concern for taking care of people or, supporting, giving back to the community. When we're looking, when we're like pushing ourselves to look for status and position, and we want people to look at us a certain way and have a certain title in our email signatures that people think about us a certain way, or when we want praise from other people, right? And then all of these things, they're not going to benefit us in this life or in the hereafter. So the scholars tell us that these fall into that category of things that don't concern us and things that we shouldn't be focused on, right? And if we just take a moment to imagine, like, one of the biggest implications of this hadith is this idea of gossip, right? So if we think about what a world would look like without gossip, right? Where it doesn't matter what the brand is of the clothes that we're wearing. It doesn't matter what kind of car that we're driving or what kind of home we're living in. We can just exist in peace without thinking, what are other people going to say about the way I dress, the way I look, what I drive, how much money I have? If we could just imagine what it would be like to live without thinking about that all the time, about what are other people going to think about me, right? That's what this hadith is encouraging us, right? Like when we look at ourselves, right, what do we do? How do we treat the people around us, right? If we're like going over to other people's homes and our first thought is to look around and see, how clean is their house? How well do they vacuum? How well do they keep it clean? If we're pulling up Zillow to see how much their house costs or how much houses in the neighborhood are and things like that, like if that's the way we deal with the people around us, right? Then the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that not only is this kind of a lower level of our faith, but it's also harming ourselves and harming the people around us, right? Because at the end of the day, the biggest danger is that we spend so much time focusing on other people, keeping up with other people, seeing what other people are doing. We spend so much time focused on others that we forget about ourselves, right? There's a beautiful ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this idea that nasullaha fa'ansahum anfusahum. Allah talks about some people who they forgot, they completely left out their remembrance of Allah. So as a result, Allah let those people forget themselves. Meaning like Allah let those people forget to focus on the things that are actually important in their life, right? And so if we as people, if we continue prioritizing like digging into other people's lives and seeing what other people are up to, and obviously with an intention that's negative, right? If we keep doing that, then we're going to be so distracted that we forget to focus on ourselves. We forget to think about ourselves, and we forget to think that one day we're going to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He's going to ask us, what did we do with the time that He gave us, the health that He gave us, the money that He gave us? What did we do with all of those things? And we don't want to stand before Allah and answer that, Ya Allah, I can tell you everything about what this person in my community was up to or all of the wrong things that they did in their business. If we spend all of our time prying into other people's lives, one day we're going to stand before Allah and maybe we're not going to have much to show for ourselves. And so, again, this is part of the beauty of our deen is that the Prophet ﷺ here, he's telling us to do something very simple, right? He's not telling us to do something that requires a ton of wealth. It's not something that requires like perfect memory, like memorizing the entire Quran. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us that if we want to take a step in the direction of beautifying our Islam, then a step that we can take is to just not get involved, not obsess over other people's business when it has nothing to do with benefiting us, right? That's all. The Prophet ﷺ is asking us to do something so simple. All we need to do is just not keep our nose in other people's business. That's what the Prophet ﷺ is telling us. Something so simple, something that all of us can do. It doesn't require a certain level of wealth or education or free time. In fact, if anything, when we remove ourselves from worrying about other people's lives, we find that we have so much more time to focus on ourselves, to focus on our families, and to focus on our own deen, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he summarized this idea beautifully in another narration, where he tells us that al-kayyisu man dana nafsahu wa amila lima ba'da al-maut. Where the Prophet ﷺ, he sits with the companions and he asks them, do you know who the most intelligent person is? And they tell him, Allah and His Messenger know best. So he says, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the most intelligent person is the one who looks at himself closely, right? Instead of putting other people under a microscope and obsessing with what other people are doing wrong, what they're doing that they shouldn't be doing, what they could do better. The Prophet ﷺ says that the most intelligent person is the one who puts that reflection onto themselves. And then naturally, what's a person going to do when they reflect on themselves and what we're doing? The Prophet ﷺ says that this most intelligent person, they're going to look at themselves closely, think about themselves, about what they're doing. وَعَمِلَ لِمَا بَعْدَ الْمَوْتِ. And they're going to realize that I don't have a lot of time to prepare for my meeting with Allah. And they're going to realize that I have to spend my time and my energy and my focus doing good deeds that I can carry with me after I pass away. So at the end of the day, this hadith is encouraging us to try to focus on, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us if we want to improve our Islam, to just not dig too much into other people's business, right? And again, so much pain in this world happens because of our tongues, right? People's marriages are damaged, people's don't do well in their jobs. So many things struggle because we don't mind our own business, because we keep talking about other people, spreading rumors, digging into what people are up to. All of this hurts the entire community as a whole. And so the Prophet ﷺ is encouraging us that if you want to improve your faith, if you want to improve your practice as a Muslim, then at the very least, don't engage in that thing. And that's going to take us so far. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So we've been reflecting on this beautiful hadith where the Prophet ﷺ tells us that part of the beautification of a person's faith is to not involve themselves too much in things that aren't going to benefit us in this life and in the hereafter, right? And the scholars of hadith tell us that the entire deen can be summarized in 4 narrations, and this is one of them, right? So what does this hadith leave us with? Right? First and foremost, this idea that the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that people's ranks in their Islam and their faith are different, right? Just because we're all Muslim, that's a beautiful thing that unites all of us, but we should recognize that we can put in effort to improve our faith and to be at a higher level. And the Prophet ﷺ is telling us here that one way that we can rank up in our Islam and our practice of our faith is to not bury ourselves too much in other people's business, right? The second thing the Prophet ﷺ is telling us here is, of course, that if we don't engage, that we shouldn't engage in things that don't relate to us, right? That when we're thinking about, backbiting about other people or digging into someone's social media to see what they're up to, what trips they're taking, when we're doing these things with a negative intention, we should remember this hadith is telling us that we should put that energy instead to focusing on ourselves, right? Not in a selfish way, but focusing on ourselves that what do I have prepared to meet Allah, right? What good deeds do I have ready for when I am stand before Allah on the Day of Judgment, right? And finally, this beautiful benefit of when we take this advice from the Prophet ﷺ, when we stop burying ourselves and digging into other people's lives, that actually we end up with so much free time, right? We free up all of this time that we don't spend digging into other people's lives and mistakes and things that they're doing and things about their families that are not going well. When we stop doing that, all of a sudden we have this time that's freed up, right? How much time do we spend on our phones every day, digging into things that have no impact on this life or our hereafter, right? When we cut back on that, it's not we can spend more time with our families, with our children. We can spend more time doing worship for ourselves. So all of that time frees up, right? And one beautiful thing to do is anytime you see a narration, reflecting on how it connects to the person who narrated it, right? So this companion, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, he spent a very short time with the Prophet ﷺ, only maybe 3 or 4 years. He came to Medina towards the end of the Prophet's life. And despite the fact that he spent only 3 or 4 years with the Prophet ﷺ, he's one of the top 2 narrators of hadith that we have. He has narrated tens of thousands of narrations, if not thousands, from the Prophet ﷺ. And so we see how this companion put this into practice, right? He recognized that if I don't get involved in things that aren't important, I can focus on the time I have with the Prophet ﷺ. And that's how he was able to narrate thousands of hadith to us so that we can learn about the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And so, if we can take just one thing from this khutbah, just remember this beautiful narration of the Prophet ﷺ, where he tells us that from the beauty of a person's faith is leaving that which does not concern us. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulih al-kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma aghfir lana warhamna wa'afu anna wa la tu'adhibna. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما اللهم انصر إخواننا المستضعفين في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين ودمر أعداء الدين عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروه يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Try to fill in any gaps in the row in front and line up your shoulders. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها وأخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها بأن ربك أوحى لها يومئذ يصدر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يره. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.